Welcome back. Welcome back in everyone to the Arc Media podcast. Doing a little bit of a special edition show today, if you will. It's it's one that I was trying to do last week, I'll be totally honest. As many of you noticed, I wasn't on last week at all. There are multiple reasons for that. Number one, I actually went home um, would have been not this past weekend, but the weekend before, to hang out with some people. My brother actually had his first kid, so I was hanging out with them, seeing my nephew. Is that right? Nephew. Yes. The whole family tree dynamic. I don't get into that. But no, I went home to actually see my nephew for the first time. And while I was there, it ended up a little sick. Everyone in my family did. My brother ended up sick. My mom ended up sick. My dad did. I ended up a little ill too. So that's the first part of that. And then the second part of that is the news that broke Sunday. It would have been last Sunday. And then the official word came out, I guess, Tuesday morning. And that news, as many of you know, as many of you have guessed by now, or could have guessed anyway, is that Mississippi State head football coach Mike Leach passed away unexpectedly. Um, like I said, this was a show I was going to do last week, but between being a little ill, between being a little under the weather, and also the fact that I tried multiple times and I couldn't do it. I'll be totally honest with you. I couldn't sit here, and I tried a few different times, and in all honesty, I ended up with tears in my eyes. I ended up breaking down just a little bit, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Um, I'll get to that a little later on in the show. I'm going to give the personal reason why it is that he meant so much to me. But before I do that, let's break down what we know surrounding that whole situation and the way it went down. Um, I woke up on Sunday morning, like I said, would have been last Sunday morning, and there was a notification on my phone from, I guess it was probably ESPN, that said, hey, Mike Leach had been hospitalized with a personal health issue, I believe is the way they quoted it. Well, when I read that, I don't think anyone necessarily realized quite how serious it was, not based on the wording that was being put out there anyway. I saw it and I was like, okay, he had a minor issue, but he's going to be fine. Probably coach the bowl game. Even if he doesn't coach the bowl game coming up in 2 weeks or so for Mississippi State, he'll be on the sideline next year, and everything's fine. And then by Sunday night, we started hearing word that it was not a minor issue, it was a major issue. Um, whether it was a massive heart attack, whether it was some type of major stroke, I don't know that we know for sure. I don't know that they have actually released what the specific cause was. But you started getting the realization late Sunday night that this was an issue. This was a problem. It was some type of major issue. And then you wake up Monday, no real news had changed. You hadn't really gotten any updates at all, except for the fact that you could tell it was extremely serious. They said he was in, I think they were saying critical condition at the time. And then as as the day went on Monday, I think most of us just got the feeling that it wasn't going the way any of us wanted it to. You know, the fact is that your prayers and everything else, they weren't necessarily being answered in regards to the Mike Leach situation. And went to bed on Monday, woke up on Tuesday, and you got news that He had passed away some at some point through the night, um, Monday night. And for me, that one hit extremely hard. Like I said, I know it's been a week now. They just held the memorial service down in Starkville. I was able to watch that. I wasn't actually able to get down there for it. I wanted to. I wasn't able to get down there for it, but I was able to watch it. And props to Mississippi State. Props to everyone for putting on a great service for an even better guy. And trust me, I never had the luxury, the privilege to meet Mike Leach personally. I would have loved to. I never got that privilege. I was never lucky enough to meet the man. But for me, I now want to share why it is this one hit me so hard. And there are millions of people out there. I guarantee you, there are millions of people out here who can give you similar stories. They can tell you their own personal experiences, and that's great. Go listen to them too. I, Listen to my experience, listen to my personal stories surrounding my reflection about why it meant so much. And then if you can find theirs, go listen to theirs too. Because that's how unique, that's how um what's the word you want to use? Just iconic, legendary, any other words you want to throw out there. That's what Mike Leach was. And the reason I say that is anyone who knows college football, you know about Mike Leach, okay? You know his the fact that he, along with his mentor Hal Mummy, while he was at Kentucky, Valdosta, and Iowa Wesleyan, maybe. I'm not sure if Hal Mummy was there with Leach at Iowa Wesleyan or not, but that under the guise of Hal Mummy, they created what is known as the air raid offense. From the football side of things, that in and of itself is incredible. We all agree that in and of itself is absolutely incredible. It was innovative, it was different, and it's something that you still see to this day, arguably even more so than you did back in the day. But more than just the air raid offense that him and Hal Mummy created that led to 18 wins as an unranked team over an AP top 25 team. By the way, that is a record. That just goes to show how incredible of a head coach Mike Leach was, how innovative as a head coach Mike Leach was, and the problems that the air raid offense brought for virtually everyone. But this isn't necessarily about football. When we think of Mike Leach, when you think of everything that you know surrounding Mike Leach, it's not necessarily football that comes to mind. It's everything else. When you think about Mike Leach, when you think about everything that you know about the guy rightfully named the Pirate, it's due to everything else. It's due to his tendency to trail off in any press conference, in any interview. It didn't matter. We're talking about a guy who wrote a book about Geronimo. We're talking about a guy who was extremely fond of pirates. That's the reason he got his nickname. What was he so interested in surrounding pirates? He was interested in the way the leadership of a pirate ship worked. When you look at a pirate ship, guess what? If the leader, the captain, isn't doing their job, they can be overthrown. It's not unsimilar. It's not dissimilar to the sport of football when you look at coaches. If a coach is not doing their job, they can be let go, somebody else comes in. So for Mike Leach, that was always one of the things that he was so interested in surrounding pirates and just warfare in general. Like I said, between Geronimo, which he wrote a book about, between pirates, he was well known as basically saying, "Hey, go out and swing your sword." He wrote a book named "Swing Your Sword." I actually have it right over here. Magnificent book. I encourage you all go read it. If you can find it, pick it up, read it. It's not all that long. You'll learn a lot. You'll enjoy it. Dude is magnificent at whatever he does, whether it's a football coach, whether it's a speaker. He was a professor. He ran a 5-week seminar while he was at Washington State. After he coached at Texas Tech, he ended up getting fired for sketchy reasons. We're not going into that there because I'll say foul things about people. But after that, after a brief break, he ended up in Pullman, Washington, coaching Washington State. What did he do with Washington State? He turned the program around. He turned the job at Washington State into a job down in Starkville, Mississippi, where things are trending in the right direction for Mississippi State. So when you look at it, it's one of those things where, like I said, we all know the stuff surrounding the football side of things, but he, regardless of whether you're a football fan or not, he is a guy that I think a lot of us can take a page out of his book and use that in life. And he was a guy who was always curious. Didn't matter. Didn't matter what the case was. He died at the age of 61. Guess what? For 61 years of his life, he ran around curious about virtually everything. He wanted to know new things. Knowledge was key to him, and that was made abundantly clear time and time again. And because of his uniqueness, you saw the interviews surrounding different topics. You think about the interview where he started discussing his players' fat little girlfriends and the fact that his players weren't focused. You think about the interview that he did surrounding Bigfoot. You think about his take on candy corn, Halloween candy. You think about his comments actually just this year surrounding weddings and eloping and everything else. He was a walking soundbite, and it all is due in part to the fact that everyone realized his interest went far more than football. You see a lot of people in sports, a lot of football coaches these days and everything else, and it seems like it's solely focused directly on the sport at hand, whether it's football, baseball, basketball, doesn't matter. With Mike Leach, you never knew what the focus was. And that's one thing that he embraced. That's one thing that he was great at. And that's one thing that virtually everyone out here may know him for better than just his success between the lines on a football field. For me personally, I want to break down why it is that this meant so much to me, what Mike Leach meant to me in my life. I didn't really start paying attention to football until I was 5 or 6 years old, I guess it was. This would have been 2000, 2001, give or take. And the first football game I remember watching was a Miami versus Florida State football game. I have no idea. I got to be totally honest. I was extremely young. It's the only one I remember watching as a kid. I vividly remember it because I had spent the night on a Friday night with one of my friends when I was like 5, 6 years old, whatever it was. And when my parents came home and picked me up the next day on that Saturday, we went home. I sit down, and my dad has a football game on. It's Miami and Florida State. That's what I remember. That's all I remember. From that day forward, I've been a Miami Hurricanes fan. That's great. Go Hurricanes. By the way, they're not doing too great. Mario Cristobal, we're waiting on Mario to turn things around. But that's not the point of this. Um, so that would have been when I was 5 or 6. Well, then growing up, we all heard the stereotypes. Let's be totally honest. If you were a kid growing up, you hear a lot of the stereotypes, and you don't have to be 15, 16, 17 years old to hear these stereotypes, which are that, hey, if you want a future as a player, especially in football, you got to be big, you got to be strong, you got to be all of these things. But then the other stereotype we heard was, the vast majority of players, the vast majority of coaches, let's be honest, they're not all that intelligent. That's one of the stereotypes you hear. You still hear it today. I was hearing that from the time I was 7, 8 years old. Okay. And for me, I was a tiny, tiny kid. Right now, I'm not actually all that big. I'm sitting at about 5'10" and a half, 5'11", weighing in about 170. I'm not a big dude. I do okay for myself, but that's that. When I was growing up, I was a whole hell of a lot smaller than I am now. But growing up, you always hear, number one, like I said, you got to be bigger, you got to be stronger. But you also hear that, hey, athletes by and large, and even coaches aren't all that intelligent. That went against everything I was growing up. I was the kid when I was in second and third grade. I'll be walking down the hallway and everything else. I would have a book in my hand. I was one of those nerdy kids. I just was. Was, always have been. I love reading. I love learning new things. Well, when you're an 8-year-old kid, when you're a 9-year-old kid, you hear these stereotypes, and that plays with you. Because for me, it was one where I was playing baseball at the time, coach pitch, whatever it was, where the coach is in the circle just tossing you the ball. I was a decent baseball player. At the time, everything was great. Never played football, but growing up in the South, guess what? One thing that is huge, college football, always has been huge for my entire life. We're not talking just SEC football. We're not talking just Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12 football. No. Well, back at the time, we're talking Pac-10 football, not even Pac-12. I grew up in a family where I could wake up on a Saturday and guess what? There's football on all day. That's where my love of the sport came. But growing up, like I said, what I always heard was, hey, to be a player, to be a coach, to be involved in sports as a whole, guess what? Most of them aren't all that intelligent. You got to be bigger, you got to be faster, you got to be stronger. For the playing side of things, a lot of that's true. And then I remember this was when Mike Leach was still at Texas Tech. This would have been 2003, 2004, something like that. It's a random Saturday, so I'm probably 9, maybe 10 years old, give or take. And it's a random Saturday, and little 3rd, 4th grade me comes walking in, just watching football with my dad and everything else. We're just hanging around the house. And like I said, it's not strictly held to SEC football, ACC, Big Ten. No, we watched a little bit of everything. Well, this particular day, I don't know what happened, but there was a Texas Tech game on. And after the game, they show this interview with Mike Leach. And I can't remember whether it was like an on-field interview or whether it was in the press conference after the game. I don't know. I was like 9. But he gets asked a question and he just starts going into this random, just off, offhand, off topic um, discussion about pirates and such. And for 9, 10-year-old me, that immediately clicked. With me, that immediately clicked because I was like, you don't see football coaches, you don't see coaches really to any degree end up in a situation where they have real conversations about different topics. That's not something I'd ever grown up hearing. That's not something you really ever saw. So to see this random guy, this head football coach at a Power Five school in Texas Tech, randomly start discussing pirates and being very clearly more unique and more intelligent, not using the same old coach speak that you always hear, that stuck out with me as a kid immediately. And that never changed. So growing up the entire time, from the time I was 9, 10 years old, I paid attention to Mike Leach and I was like, if this guy can do it, why can't I? And it doesn't matter whether we're discussing coaching, it doesn't matter whether we're discussing playing, it doesn't matter whether we're discussing what I do right now, which is sitting in front of all of you and simply talking about sports. Whatever it is, growing up, for a lot of people, for a lot of kids, you get told, hey, you can't do this if you don't play this sport at a high level in college, in the pros, whatever it is. You can't do this, um, if you're not big, fast, strong, all of these other things. Mike Leach was a walking phenomenon that proved that that was incorrect. And from the time that I was 9 or 10 years old, that immediately stuck with me because I remember seeing him and I was like, this guy doesn't look like an athlete. This guy doesn't look like a typical football coach. Guess what? This guy doesn't speak like a typical football coach, like a typical coach that anyone is used to seeing, anyone is used to hearing at all. And that really stuck with me. And from that point on, I was a guy who I never really had the feeling that I could get anywhere in sports. Not as a player, not as a coach, not as someone sitting, like I said, right now talking about sports in front of you guys. I never had that feeling. And then all of a sudden, I'm 9 or 10 years old and I see this coach at Texas Tech start talking about pirates, and that feeling immediately flipped. And I was like, well, wait a minute. If he can do it, why can't I? What's stopping me from being right there one day or right here one day, even if I don't play a sport at a college level, at a pro level? So for me personally, when it comes to Mike Leach, when I think about Mike Leach, was it the first football game I ever watched? No. Was he the first coach I ever saw speak? No, he wasn't. None of those things. But he had one of the biggest impacts and impressions on me growing up to where I am today because of the fact that he was so unique. He was so different than everyone else. And that was before, like I said, that's when I'm 9, 10 years old. That's before I really realized the impact that the air raid offense had. The fact that he was also one hell of a football coach. Not just being different, but he was one hell of a football coach as well. When I saw all this, this is long before I realized any of the intricacies surrounding that. This was when I was just a 9-year-old kid watching this guy on TV saying, I didn't expect you to start talking about pirates. It's not what I had in mind when I was listening, wee little 9-year-old here thinking, oh, he's going to talk about football. Well, they ran the ball well, they threw the ball well. No, he starts talking about Pirates, and you're like, okay. And like I said, that just immediately stuck with me. And that has stuck with me now for what, 17, 18 years of my life. I'm 27 right now. That stuck with me all the way through. Without Mike Leach, would I have ever played football um, throughout middle school, junior high, whatever you want to call it, and then for a few years in high school? Probably not, because I don't know that I would have ever fallen in love with the sport the way I did. Without Mike Leach, would I have ever figured out a way to find a job talking about sports? Probably not, because growing up, if it weren't for him, I don't know that I would have had the feeling, the confidence, the optimism that I could get somewhere in the sports industry, whether it's sports itself, whether it's sports media, without little 9, 10-year-old me seeing this guy breaking down one of these stereotypes that we typically see, that we typically hear. So that's the reason, for me personally, this loss meant so much. That's the reason I actually broke down when I read the news. That's the reason when I tried to do this show last week, I just couldn't do it. I truly could not do it, because I know there's a lot of people out here who in sports media, and guess what? They know him personally. I don't. I'm not going to pretend like I do. But it's also important to realize that for a lot of these people that you see in sports media talking about it, the fact is that a lot of these people, they were where they were long before Mike Leach was a thing. Long before he was a walking soundbite. They already had jobs in the field. Um, they are people who, they fell in love with sports long before Mike Leach came around, long before Mike Leach was the Pirate. For me, I had none of that. For me, I didn't necessarily have a love of football before Mike Leach came around, before I saw that interview that day when I'm 9 or 10 years old. I, as much as I enjoyed playing baseball, I don't know that I ever had a feeling that I could use that love and use sports to somehow end up with me having this job one day where I'm sitting here doing what I love, talking about sports. Without Mike Leach being the unique guy that he is, I don't know that any of this is a thing. I don't know where my life goes from that point if I don't see that interview when I'm 9 or 10 years old. I would be willing to bet that it wouldn't be me in the sporting industry, in the sports industry. I doubt that would be a thing. I doubt it would be me sitting here right now in front of you guys, because I don't know that I would have fallen in love with sports the same way, because I don't know that I would have ever had the feeling that I could make it in sports, regardless of what it is, whether, like I said, whether it's a player, whether it's a coach, whether it's in the sports media, the sports writing, podcast host side of things. So that's why this loss meant so much to me. That's why it was tough when I saw it. I broke down, like I said, I tried to do this earlier and I couldn't do it. And I think watching the memorial today that they did down in Starville, I think that helped a lot, just because you see it and you hear other people tell their stories, and it's like, yeah. So that's the reason this is about a week late. But I hope you enjoyed this. Like I said, rest in peace to Mike Leach. I have an article up surrounding it. It's up on the Substack as well, substack.com/arcmedia. Go check that out. Go read that. It's not all that long, but it's there. Strongly encourage you to go read that as well. Rest in peace to the Pirate. His impact on my life is something that can't be downplayed for me. Not something I ever wanted to have to read, to be totally honest. I don't think any of us necessarily expected, you know, me being an Ole Miss fan, me being an Ole Miss alum, I don't think anyone surrounding this state, anyone in this state, expected that 3 weeks ago, when we're watching the Egg Bowl on Thanksgiving night and you see Ole Miss fall to Mississippi State, that was the last time we were going to see Mike Leach on the sideline. I don't think anyone had that thought. Like, everything for Mississippi State at the time was going in the right direction. Everything seemed to be trending in the right direction if you're a Bulldog fan. And then this news pops up, and this is one of those that it transcends sports. Sports cease to exist when it comes to just being a human being, and when it comes to seeing an icon, a role model, whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter that I'm an Ole Miss fan and that he was coaching at Mississippi. None of that matters. None of that ever mattered. I was a huge fan of Mike Leach, like I said, growing up when he was at Texas Tech. I was a massive fan of Mike Leach when he was in Pullman, Washington, at Washington State, coaching quarterbacks like Gardner Minshew. By the way, Gardner Minshew down here from Mississippi, down here with Gardner Minshew, coaching Gardner Minshew at Washington State, coaching guys like Anthony Gordon, I think was his name, and now down here at Mississippi State, coaching guys like Will Rogers and all of those. So, yeah, it's great to look at it and say, oh, well, you're an Ole Miss fan. None of that matters. None of that matters. It doesn't matter at all. Rivalry aside, sports aside, Mike Leach was far more than a football coach. He was far more than a coach of my school's rival. He was a great human being. Did he have some controversy? Sure. How many of us don't? That doesn't matter. He was a great human being. He was curious every single day when he woke up until the day he passed away. I promise you, he's chilling out in heaven right now. He's at the pearly gates looking down on all of us, questioning what's going on. The second he got to the pearly gates, he probably looked around and was like, wonder what's going to be different in here. That's just the way his mind worked. He was innovative. He was curious. He was always, you could tell he was always one who was seeking out more knowledge. Huge loss, not for me. Okay, not only for me, definitely a huge loss for me, and the impact in my life that he's had on me. Huge loss, not only for the sport of college football, but a huge loss for millions of people out there whose lives he managed to touch, sports fans or not. Rest in peace to Mike Leach. Rest in peace to the Pirate. Sail on.